The title of today's topic for our Sunday satsang is this world was, as Master would say, was made for our instruction and for our enjoyment, our entertainment. But as he would go on and say, after he would say that, he says, but oh, how few are instructed and how very few are entertained by their experience here in this world. Because typically we find ourselves enjoying and we find ourselves ultimately landing in a world of suffering because we do not learn our lessons. Sadadevi mentioning learning to be able to enjoy the little things of life like music. And wouldn't it be in a sense idyllic if we could, that joyfulness that comes from childhood, and be able to carry that as we get to be a little bit older. But we know children, how very lovely, those of you who will have kids, you'll see, and you remember back in your own life, they start out so lovingly sweet. And then they get older, and pretty soon those sweet little darlings can be a challenge and a handful. And then they grow up, they become teenagers, they become young adults, and what do? They have to learn their own lessons. Unfortunately, again and again and again. And here we are. We're here. After how many lifetimes has it been? The lessons that we've had to learn along the way. And to the degree that it's entertaining, we go up and we go down, and sometimes we have disasters, and sometimes we can get up from those disasters and we can laugh at it. That's fine. But then after a while, we're not always laughing. We find that we find ourselves in a world of suffering. We find ourselves in a world of heartbreak. We find ourselves at a point where we do not learn our lessons, and we have to repeat those things again and again until, as Master said, as Yogananda said, we reach that point where life, it becomes agonizingly monotonous. Do I have to learn this lesson again? And I think each of us, if we look at our lives, will see that there's some theme in most people's life where we're trying to learn a lesson. And we say God knocks us on the side of the head again and again, but I think it's more that we're pounding our head on the wall more than the wall is hitting us. Who's doing the hitting? Again and again and again until we learn that lesson. And this is what life is about. Life is about learning the lessons of what is going to be successful. And by success, I don't mean material success outwardly or getting lots of friends or whatever we might want to define it, but success in being able to have joy and standing firm and feeling God's presence in the midst of shaking, or as Yogananda would say, in the midst of crashing worlds. We stand firm, unshaken, but not grimly. We stand firm and unshaken with joy and love in our heart. And if we can get to that point in life, then we can say, I think we can honestly say our life has been successful. Whatever happens outside, maybe outwardly it might be measured by what the world would call failure. But if you can stand firm and joyful in the midst of all trials, is it really a failure? However the world defines it, it's not. It's a true success. And this is what life is meant to be. But why is it that so few people seem to learn these lessons? Why does it take so long? And of course, Yogananda said, Kriyananda asked that very question to Yogananda. Does it all? He said, lifetimes and lifetimes, when he had told Yogananda, oh, we've been together many lifetimes in the past. And Yogananda, or Kriyananda asked him, he says, does it always take so long? And Yogananda said, oh, yes, it does. Desires come, distractions come, things come to pull us away this way and that. I've seen many people, and the temptations in my own life coming and going. something, you want to really do this, you want to really do that, and then you realize, wait a minute. It's like that story of Narada. Do you know the story? Did I tell that story the other day? I told it to somebody, some group. Narada, he was walking with Vishnu. They're crossing the desert, and a hot day. And Vishnu says to Narada, he says, Narada, see that village over there? I'm thirsty. Would you go to the village and get me a glass of water? And Narada says, of course, Lord, I'll go. And off he goes. He goes to the village, and he comes to the first house in the village, knocks on the door, and the door opens, and there's a beautiful young maiden there in the house. And Narada just... He must have been a young Narada. Not an old, wise Narada, young Narada. Anyway, he sees her, and he just becomes transfixed. And she says, yes, may I help you? And I imagine he was kind of like that. Invites him in. And of course, the family's there. And they say, oh, young man, please stay for lunch. We got just lunchtime. Here, take here. And say, okay, he sits for lunch. He begins talking, and he begins to know the family, and they like him. And of course, he likes the young girl, the young lady. And the next thing you know, they've got him fixed up to get married. And Narada just thinking, well, this is great, this is wonderful. And he says, by the way, and you're in a village, you marry, and I'll give you a piece of land here, and we'll give you some cows, and you got some land, and we'll help you get started. And Narada's thinking, wow, this is great, and so he settles down. And time passes, and he has one child, 2 children. Pretty soon he's got 3. Time is flying. He's going by. Well, as life would have it, he's there, and one day the rains come, and heavy, the river begins to rise. It rises up, until finally it's in flood. And Narada says to his wife and family, come, we must go. And he grabs the children, and he puts one child under his arm, he puts another child up on his shoulders, grabs his wife's hand, who has the 3rd child, and they go, and the river's in flood, and they've got to cross the river. And it's water everywhere flowing, and they start to go across, and Narada stumbles. And the child on his shoulders goes into the water. It starts to be carried downstream. Narada grabs for it. But in the grabbing, he let go of the other child. And that child starting to carry down. And the mother, seeing both her children being taken in flood, she just gives up hope and says, oh, and collapses into the river with the 3rd child, and all 4 of them go down the river. And Narada's left, and he says, oh, everything's lost. And he just gives up, and he just collapses into the water and is taken away. And he wakes up, and he's in the sand, lying in the sand, and he hears a voice saying, Narada, Narada. He wakes up, and it's Vishnu. And Vishnu says, Narada, what are you doing here sleeping in the sand? A half an hour ago, I sent you to that village to get me a glass of water. And here you've been sleeping all this time. Now, that's the end of the story. But that's the story that we find ourselves in as devotees, lifetime after lifetime, until we begin to wake up and we begin to see through the veil of what is going on here. This life is for our education. It's for our education to learn the lessons of life so we don't have to repeat again and again. It's not again. And then we learn. But it's a special sort of education because we learn, unfortunately, we do learn lessons. I think all of us have learned something in life. But isn't it true that many of the lessons that we've learned have been through suffering, it's been painful to learn those lessons. But it doesn't have to be that way. We can learn the lessons if we're wise. Learn the lessons in the right way and not have to go through the suffering. But unfortunately, for whatever the reason, we seem to be made in such a way that we have to stub our toe again and again until finally, I'm not going to do that anymore. And keep to that resolution, because God meant this world not for our suffering, but for our, as Yogananda said, for our entertainment. You could say for our enjoyment. To be able to say, whoa, that was a good one. That was a good one. I'm not going to do that one again, because you learned it and you enjoyed it on some level. But why don't we enjoy? Because when things go wrong, we're so close to it. We can't detach ourselves from it. When we lose the game, we, like a little child, they cry, and when things go wrong, they cry. We have to be a little bit detached, and yet, at the same time, engaged in what we're doing. Because we cannot be indifferent and impassive. We have to, and this is the fine balance of the spiritual path, to walk that razor's edge of being 100% engaged in what we're doing with my full attention, my energy. I give it my all. But when I fail, I can let it go. Because I did my best, not whether I won or lost the game, you see. Now this is what the scriptures tell us. The scripture, Nishkam Karma, to be able to act in this world full-heartedly, giving our all. And if we act in the sense of not for our self-gain, but we act as the best we can in order that we might give the fruits of our action to something higher. And so this is the value when we teach people, when we learn on the spiritual path to be able to learn to serve. Now, service isn't about sweeping the floor. You know, we do that in an outward form. But service is learning to act unselfishly for a higher cause because it's the right thing to do. Now, sweeping the floor is one thing. Serving in a job is another thing. Let's say being a soldier, you serve for a cause. There is a cause, there's a purpose to life. In everything we do, life has a purpose. And I think modern society, mankind, let me say it that way, modern mankind, 20th century, now we're in 21st century, there is a certain disease that people suffer from. And a disease that we need to be aware of is people in society, for whatever reason, I don't think actually, I've traveled a lot in my life. I see this more in the West, I think, than I do here in India. But I have noticed over the years that what happens in the West eventually starts happening here in India too. Have you noticed that? It's because we're becoming a world community. But the disease of the 20th century is people having a lack of meaning in life. What's life about all the way, anyway? And people have started to lose the sense of meaning of what this life is all about. Does it have a purpose? Now, of course, atheism would say, no, there's no purpose. There's no purpose there. But even people who are nominally religious are being eaten a little bit by their daily lives. This attitude is there a real purpose for what I'm doing? Does it have any meaning? Do I go to the job every day? Is there any meaning to that? I'm raising a family, but I don't know. What's the real meaning of life? And I do think society as a whole needs to be imbued with the sense of purpose. And I think this is one of the I'm not the only one, of course, who've noticed this. Others have noticed it as well. And I remember reading a book by a man named Viktor Frankl. Some of you may have heard of Viktor Frankl. He's a well-known psychologist, and he's passed on now. And he was interred in a prison camp during World War II. And he noticed that many, many people would die. Well, naturally, the conditions would kill people. But he said many people died not because the conditions killed them directly. He says, but they gave up hope. They lost the sense of meaning, of their lives had any meaning in that situation. In the midst of tremendous suffering, they would give up. But then he also noticed something else. And this is what set him on his life course in psychology. He saw there were some people in the midst of the worst suffering, they held on and they remained strong. And because they found something to give them meaning in life. And as long as they had that meaning, they were motivated to endure, to go forward, to keep trying. And he took it upon himself, noticing this, to spend his life while he was in that prison camp for some number of years, is to go from person to person, seeing how they were doing and try to find some way to give them meaning in life, even in the simplest ways. One man was he was on his deathbed, he had given up. And Viktor Frankl knew him and his situation, and he encouraged him. He says, don't you have family somewhere outside of the prison camp in another country, free and safe? And he said, yes, I do. And he says, think of them. How are they going to feel? Would they want you to come back alive? Yes. He says, well, live for them. Another man he had been put in the prison camp, and he was a scientist, and he had come upon some significant discovery, but he was put in the camp before he could ever publish. And he was another one. He was going to give up. And he says, remember that science paper you wanted to write? He says, hang on when you can publish it. Just think of something. Yes, okay. And then he would daily make the rounds, reminding people of things that were meaningful, and even the silliest things, little things. But this is what each of us need, and I think society itself needs meaning in life. And when we think of our lives as being for our education and our entertainment, the implication is there's a reason for it. There's a direction to our lives. We are being educated for what reason? Why? What's our reason for being educated? What's the goal of that? And it's ultimately for our freedom. We're learning the lessons of life so that we may one day be free. And everything we do in life has some purpose. And the wise person introspects and tries to see, what's the purpose of this? What is the lesson that I'm learning? This suffering that is happening to me, what's the purpose of that? Now, Mr. Frankl also had one thing that he said, and he said, everything can be taken away from you in the midst of suffering. If life is difficult, but one thing cannot be taken from you ever. He says, your ability to choose how you will approach that circumstance in your life. That cannot be taken from you. You always have that choice. And this is something to keep in mind. We always do have the choice to make in life. Is this life, what is the lesson? How do I choose to respond to what has happened to me? May seem terrible, may seem, whatever. How do I respond? That's the ultimate freedom that you have. And by making that choice, you exert your self, your will, your humanity when you do that. And so live life in that way. And if we can, why not learn the lessons that come from a life lived that way? And why wait for suffering? It does not have to be that way. Most people, they learn that way, but it doesn't have to be that way. We can learn, joyfully as well. And while this is happening, remember, although whatever we see on the surface may look like difficult times and challenges, ultimately, the saints throughout the centuries, throughout the millennia, have all said the same thing. Behind it all, behind the screen of tragedy at sometimes, there is a divine purpose for each person's life. And the ultimate goal of every one of us, which must be realized, is that the ultimate goal behind everything we do is joy. It's bliss. That's the goal all souls are destined to experience, and each one of us. And it's waiting for us. But we have to learn our lessons first. We're in school, and until we graduate, we're going to keep having to repeat the 11th standard or whatever it is, and taking chemistry over and over again. So learn the lessons. Learn them gracefully rather than painfully. And remember at all times, step back a little bit. Have perspective. And realize this is a play. It's the beam of light. And as Yogananda would say, when the disciples, he'd take them to the movies and they were all engrossed in the movie, he'd tap them on the shoulder and he'd say, look at the light, the beam, you see, the projector. It's all a play of light and shadow. And enjoy. So have fun with the movie. Doesn't mean to not watch the movie. Just watch it in the right way and realize that it's just a beam of light shining. And then we can say, yes, this life was about our entertainment and perhaps even more importantly, our education, that ultimately we see the purpose behind it all. So much joy to all of you, and let's live our life in that way and keep that in mind.